Go Blue for Kids is underway as McMahon Ryan Child Advocacy Center raises awareness during National Child Abuse Prevention Month. A month of events kicked off with its annual breakfast. This year's keynote speaker, Dawn Schiller, a survivor of human trafficking as a teen in Hollywood. She travels the country sharing her story to raise awareness.
It's for every survivor who needs their story repeated in the way that is accurate, in the way of what the survivor is experiencing during the time of victimization and how they got out of it. Their voices are so important, and we can't put our own labels on their experience.
Unfortunately, it happens every day. You know, we can on any given day have 5 to 10 kids that come through our doors who are there to share their truth and their stories. So it happens more often than people think.
To learn more about how you can go blue for kids, head to localsyr.com.
Well, April is Child Abuse Prevention Month, and Child Advocacy Center McMahon Ryan has some wonderful events planned this month to help support them saving children's lives from child abuse, from sex trafficking, and so much more.
That's right, and joining us this morning, she was this year's keynote speaker at the McMahon Ryan Child Advocacy Center's annual breakfast. Please welcome Dawn Schiller. Good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
Good.
So, Dawn, tell us a little bit about your story, you know, being sex trafficked as a child and then beyond, because it ended up snowballing into this, you know, life of sex trafficking and abuse.
Right, right. Well, there was sexual abuse in my home when I was a young kid, and there was some, you know, discipline that was really violent, in my opinion. My mother was pretty violent, and what happened was, at 15 years old, we happened to be tenants in an apartment complex where John Holmes was the manager. And what he did was he preyed on me. He basically groomed me for 6 months until he was able to take me in, and I was his private possession. And it snowballed from there into cutting me off from my family, being the only one in control of me, then selling me out on the streets of Hollywood, and then selling me to Eddie Nash, who is a infamous drug lord in Los Angeles, and who was responsible for the 4 bludgeoning deaths on Wonderland Avenue, which is known as the Wonderland murders.
And then you know, this is one of the best parts of your story. You were able, you know, from strangers who intervened and stepped in, you were able to send your predator to jail.
Yes. After being on the run with John, he took me on the run, and we were wanted, and there was a lot of people out after us. And he was beating me and selling me on the beaches of Florida. And he beat me one day in front of a group of strangers who took it upon themselves to wait for a safe moment the next day and get me out of there and take me to a safe home. And not soon after that, I turned him into the police.
There you go. Yay. We were both at the breakfast, and we were both so moved by your story that is relayed through your book, right? The Road Through Wonderland.
Right.
Why is it important, you think, Dawn, to share your story? I could assume it was a hard story to share. It was hard for me to sit and listen to it, some of it. So why is it important, you think, to talk about it?
I think it was important for me, and what I've learned over the years, it's important for many survivors to be able to be heard and not have their voice taken away from them, because that's part of what abuse is. It's about taking your voice, your personality, who you are away. My story has media attention because of the Wonderland murders and because of who my predator and pimp was. The media has wanted to retell this story, and they've wanted to do it with or without me, so I really had to suit up and be prepared emotionally and mentally and health-wise to be able to be a part of that. The media hasn't always gotten it right, and you know, and so I feel like that's another reason why it's important for me to continue to share, so that we continue to pay attention to language and the way we tell stories and how we support survivors in the telling of that.
And you know, so much of your story is about you being sex trafficked and abused as a teenager and beyond. Because you were just so manipulated that it just continued to snowball. And a lot of, you know, what I heard from your story today is that probably unbeknownst to them that your parents played a role in that. What would you say to parents and people out there who are, fostering children or raising children to for them so that this doesn't happen to their child?
Well, there's no real easy answer. I mean, every family is different. Every family has different challenges. And I think in writing my book, I historicized my family. So it really, I was able not only to relay to the public what I was going through, but I was also to see the social circumstances that my mother and father were challenged with, and why it was okay for me to be molested in my home when I was a kid, why it was okay to be hit and beat with the belt as a form of discipline. Those things were ways that I was prepared, or prepared me to be vulnerable to the next predator, and that is what happened in my story. I ended up being perfect target for somebody like John, who was, intent on manipulating and owning me.
You know what I thought one of the biggest takeaways, and we talked about this on the show, was you mentioned, this is one of the last things you said, resilience. When you had nothing, you said you had that little drop of resilience. And I think that's so telling, because for anybody, right, kids, adults, young adults that are going through this, to know that if you just have that little tiny bit of hope, sometimes it's all you need. And the help, like the center that we have here, really can do wonders for kids, right?
They can, and they can provide that hope. They can provide that drop in the glass. It came to me that resilience really was not just seeing the glass half full, because that meant that there was a half a glass, but to be able to see that there was just a drop, and knowing that all was not lost, and there was still a reason to hope. And in my day, I didn't have the services, and I mentioned that this morning, that were there to help me, and to understand the trauma that I was living through, and what trauma looked like, and how to help me. As a matter of fact, I was, re-traumatized a lot by systems that didn't understand. Law enforcement brought me back to John as one example when I ran away, and that resulted in one of the worst beatings that I can remember.
I think, can I ask a question about that? Because I feel like some people are afraid to leave because of that very fact, that thing, like they're afraid they're going to get sent back.
Right.
So what do you say to somebody that's watching that's afraid of that happening?
Well, to the victim or survivor, that's a real fear. And the predator's usually going to use that against you. They're usually going to say you can't trust anybody. You can't trust anybody in authority. You can't trust anybody to help you because you're, and they'll use all kinds of ways to make you feel less than a human being. But that's what, like the McMahon Center, what they're doing is just providing these wraparound services so that when a kid comes in, they can see that there are secure, safe people that they can lean on, and that those do exist. They exist better today than they did in my day, but we're not done. We're not done at all. And it is something that we all need to be aware of. It's not just the advocates, the politicians, law enforcement, healthcare providers. It is every community member needs to be aware. They need to know their resources, and they need to step in. I gave the example of how I got away from John by being an intervention of strangers who waited for a safe moment to take me to a safe house. And that's so important.